Hi, everyone. It's Amanda Rieger Green. Welcome to Soul Sessions. Thank you for joining me. I hope all of you are doing well. There is tremendous regenerative energy that we are all experiencing, and it's like a mixed blessing. It has moments and elements of transcendence, ecstasy, bliss, beauty, breakthrough, expansiveness, that feeling of and sensation of infinite potential where you reach out and you grasp something fundamentally, innately true within yourself. And then moments or hours later, it feels utterly distant, elusive, far away. And this tends to be happening at a very rapid pace. So it's like a tornado or a twister of energy and being in the eye of a storm. It's like sometimes I come into the eye and I'm still and steady and knowing and present, and that expansive higher dimensional consciousness feels innate and true, like everything is as it's supposed to be. And then it can be, like I said, moments or hours later and it feels fundamentally lost or just out of reach, and then I can't remember what I was putting together. I hope this resonates with you all, but I want to talk a little bit about death today. Maybe a little bit, maybe a lot of bit about death today. And as I say death and laugh, sometimes that's all you can do in the midst of immense pain, loss, and tragedy because it is so displacing and uncomfortable. In this lifetime, I've had a lot of encounters with death on a multitude of levels. And it's one of those things that is difficult and painful, and it has also brought me the greatest transcendence and knowing of the divine. And when I was little, I think I was, and I've shared this story, but the first time my mediumship skills came through at a young age with a spirit whom I knew, it was my grandmother, my father's mother. And I was 7 years old and I was feeding the neighbors' cats. They were out of town. I was in like second grade or third, maybe I was third grade, but it was feeding their cats. And we lived on a river, the Chafuncta River on the North Shore of New Orleans in Louisiana. And they had this huge bay window and I had just fed the cats and I was about to go downstairs and I looked out the bay window and I'm in third grade and I looked out and I saw my grandmother, and I didn't like, it was not an apparition, it was like I saw her energy in the water, and it was almost like it drew me in, it mesmerized me where I remember like standing. I'm in 3rd grade, and I remember standing in trance and entranced, staring at the water, connecting with her, and her telling me she had crossed over to the other side, that she had died. And she had Alzheimer's. She was ill. She lived in Baton Rouge, a couple of hours away from us. And nothing in the days leading up to that had my parents shared with me or that I'd known about that she was imminent in her stages of her disease progression. They hadn't talked about her taking a downturn or going downhill. She was in a care facility, but she told me she died and that she was fine, that she was free and that it was okay. And when I got back home and I walked in the house, my parents said, "Hey, sit down. We need to talk to you about something." And I said, "Oh, Grandy Ed died." And I mean, I remember the couch. I can remember the scene and them looking at me, and then both of them went to she overheard a conversation, but they didn't. And my mom and I had discussions about this later in my life, that they hadn't been talking about it because they had really just gotten a call that, the night before, and they hadn't shared anything with me, but that she had taken a turn. But I wasn't even in the house when all this discussion was going on. And so I shared it matter of factly, and that has been a repeat theme for me around death. When I talk about death, sometimes I can sound very distant, disassociated, and matter of fact. And I just said, "Oh, Grandy Ed died. "She's okay, she's on the other side." Like, it was like, "Yeah, it's happened, it's fine." And then I remember going to the funeral, and she had an open casket. I mean, I remember looking into the casket and seeing her all done up, and she was extremely prim and proper. My grandmother was the most eloquent woman, and any of my family listening out there, like, if you knew my grandmother, like, she was put together and next level, right? Next level prim and proper. But I remember seeing her in the casket. I remember the emotions of the funeral and what happens after death, the beginning to mourn and grieve and process and recognize that someone is humanly not going to be there. But in that moment, I remember just saying, "Oh yeah, she's gone. She's on the other side and she's fine. She told me." And, yeah, and my parents, neither one of them discounted that. I think they were confused by it and trying to, figure out how I found this stuff out, but we really didn't revisit it again, the discussion. And after that, a series, other spirits started coming to me, spirits that I was not familiar with. And in that house, I used to put, all these stuffed animals around me in the bed because all these spirits would come in at night, and also, quite frankly, extra dimensional beings. And that's another story for another episode. And also a pretty miraculous story with a child I got to work with years later who was having the same visitations in her room. But spirits were coming through, extra dimensionals, and the volume just turned up. And learning to navigate that and not being able to communicate it or, have the language to or the understanding, and then also thinking maybe it was just normal. Everybody had this, imaginary friends or, not so imaginary and spirits visiting them, but it started to come through just more rapidly. And I think that first encounter, as far as seeing beyond the veil, the other side, connecting innately with a spirit that I was very close to, loss, death, it was that glimpse of, oh, she's over there and she's okay. She's totally fine. It's her energy. She's okay. And that set the wheels in motion, whether I knew it or not, for this ability to trust the process of death, whatever that may look like. It doesn't mean that I like it or enjoy it or am asking for it to show up, but I have encountered death in so many junctures in my life. Of course, I lost my other 2 grandparents at a later stage after that, but most impacting for me was the loss of my father at age 18, and he died in our home, the Sunday morning after Easter. It was very sudden, it was acute, it was traumatic, and it was an event that forever changed my life, the course of my life. It impacted me on a consciousness level and on a spiritual level that I wouldn't puzzle piece together for many years to come. But essentially what happened is he had a pulmonary embolism and congestive heart failure. We don't know exactly, but it was some kind of combination of the 2. And I remember hearing my parents downstairs. I was in high school, it was my senior year, and it was about 5:15 AM on a Sunday morning, and I could hear them downstairs rustling around, and my mom trying to help my dad and asking what was going on. And I remember distinctly hearing it all. And right when I woke up, I said, and my dad had not been sick leading up into this. He had been getting tired. He had just had a physical. He changed insurance. There was stuff going on, but he had not had any acute instances or issues going on prior to this. But I remember waking up in my bed and I'm curled up upstairs and I heard all the commotion and I literally woke up, heard it, and I said, in my body, it was like, oh my gosh, my dad is dying. And I remember pulling the covers over my head and saying, if you go back to sleep, this isn't real. If you go back to sleep, this isn't real. Like I knew something bad was happening. I knew there was no turning back, and whatever it was tragic and fatal, but I kept thinking if I pull the covers over my head and go to sleep, and pretend and shut this out and pretend it's not happening, it's not gonna happen. Although I knew fundamentally that that wasn't the case. And, about 10 seconds later, my mom is like, "Amanda, come downstairs. Your dad is very sick and, throw some jeans on and a sweatshirt, come downstairs." And I did. And, commotion ensued after that. That was, it was chaos. And my dad essentially, it was a pretty traumatic death. He just filled with fluid and essentially drowned in that fluid and couldn't speak. And the coroner, I lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana at the time, and the coroner of Baton Rouge lived next door to us. And he was over there working on my dad before the paramedics got there. And, the paramedics arrived late. It was just a comedy of errors, to put it mildly. But what happened that was most impacting in that experience, apart from the just sheer trauma of it all, was I remember standing in my parents' doorway. The paramedics are there. Dr. Cataldi, his name was Louis Cataldi. My dad's name was Louis as well. Dr. Cataldi was working on my dad. My mom is standing there, and they're trying to resuscitate him. Um, and I'm standing in between the doorway. And I had one foot on their carpet. There was carpet in my parents' bedroom, and then there was a wood floor in the foyer hallway. And I had one foot on the carpet, one foot on the wood floor, because I'm standing in the door frame. And I didn't know what was happening, but I knew that I wasn't in my body. Like was in a dissociated state at the time. And up until then, of course, I didn't have the language to say I was in a dissociated state. I didn't know what that was, but I was not in my body, yet I was cognizant simultaneously. And it was like my spirit floated up to the top of the room. And I distinctly remember watching what was going on, the disorder and chaos and drama of what was happening in the room, and then noticing that my spirit had disassociated and was having some conversation, up in the ethers on the ceiling with another being. But it was like I couldn't hear the words. I just knew two things were happening at once. And literally, they're working on my dad, and all of a sudden I look over and I say to the paramedics, "He does not want to be intubated." And I've shared this before publicly, but the room got silent, and my mom is standing there frozen because she's panicked and afraid and everything. And the paramedics, and my mom, like, snapped, into awareness, and she said, "She's right. He does not want to be intubated. He does not, like, he does do not intubate him." And then one of them said, "How the heck does this teenager know about intubation?" And then my mom just really quickly snapped off. Her father's a pharmacist. I'm a nurse. She comes from a medical family, and I mean, that was true. But at 18, it just came to me, and I realized I realized years later, because it all flooded back in. It's like putting these puzzle pieces together. And this very much relates to the energy we are experiencing now. It's like time is simultaneous. The past, the future, and the now are all relevant. And it's like puzzle pieces are coming together. And this was like years later, as the clarification of my psychic abilities came through, it all was fundamentally clear of what happened. I connected with my dad. He was communicating. And in that moment, the other thing that was happening was, it was like he got a hold of me and he said, "Life is about to get harder than you can imagine. And it is going to be tragic and painful for the years ahead. And you are going to succeed and achieve, and you are going to fall flat on your face and make grave mistakes. Do it all. Like, do it all. It all has meaning. The beauty and the success and the fulfillment and the adventures, as well as your mistakes and your challenges and your darkness and your ugliness, all of it has meaning and is leading you somewhere." And I find that to be true. I know it to be true in my experience that what's interesting is my dad dies. It was very traumatic after that for my mom and I and my family, and a lot of things happened that really significantly impacted who I am in my life in that time. But a couple of things are quite interesting. One, that traumatic event was one of the significant turning points in my psychic abilities because all of that trauma, the death, the acuteness of that death, it disassociated me. It taught me how to step aside, to become the observer, to channel. I mean, it's really what led into me being able to channel like I do and drop into altered states of consciousness. It has a dark side too, where I can disassociate and not pay attention and not be in my body, which I'm very aware of that today. But also what was interesting is I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't therapy and those sorts. It was 1999, totally different than what we have access to today. And as far as the awareness around healing and grief and therapy in the mainstream, so to speak, and the availability of it, but it was kind of pushed to the side. Keep moving, keep going, keep going forward. And I had a friend reflect back to me in my mid 20s. I think I was about 26. And she said to me, we had reconnected after college, and she said to me, because something came out about my dad being dead and losing my dad and when it had happened. And she said, Amanda, I knew you all throughout college and I had no idea your dad died. And looking back, at that moment, I realized I pushed through, I shut out. And I mean, close friends of mine knew that my father had died. It wasn't like I hid that, but a lot of people in my public persona had no idea my story, my journey, the pain, and just before my dad died, my mom had almost died the year before with breast cancer. So 11th grade and 12th grade, basically, they were pretty crappy, and I didn't know they were pretty crappy until looking back and realizing how much was going on in my life at that time and how impactful it was. But but her saying to me, "I had no idea that you had lost your dad just before you came to school, and what like, I didn't know this." And it just shows me these parts of myself that reacted to trauma, that repressed pain, grief, and trauma, and the impact it had on me and also the people around me and what I put out in the world. And, looking back, what a gift that trauma was and what a tragedy it was. And then years later, into my late 20s, I end up working in hospice. And in hospice, of course, I was dealing with death on a daily basis and with interdisciplinary teams who were able to do remarkable healing and support work in the death, dying, and grief process with patients, families, and getting to walk alongside of those skilled individuals and heart centered individuals in a multitude of capacities. But I will never forget when I started in hospice, what my first job was helping to sign consent paperwork, documentation for patients coming on to hospice. And I had shadowed a cohort of mine my friend Joe, and Joe was just great at what he did, and I remember getting to go with him and, the consent process, there's legal documentation and paperwork, and people are dealing with a loved one and making the decision to sign someone onto hospice. It's a lot. It's a lot to talk someone through the documentation, the actual process, and then you're dealing with death, dying, someone dying, the family members, and then the layers of that coming through. And so I remember the very first time it was like, I think you can do this on your own. It was a really busy Friday. And they said, okay, Amanda, like we're throwing you in the water. We need you. And we had a pediatric hospice, the hospice that I worked with, and we had a pretty high census of one of the largest pediatric censuses for hospice in the country, actually. And we had an amazing pediatric team. And they needed me. It was a Friday afternoon, and they needed me at one of the Texas Medical Center hospitals in Houston. And they didn't really they gave me some particulars about what was going on, but nothing could prepare me for what I was about to encounter. And, I was ready to go. I had all my paperwork. I was nervous just because I'm like, what if I tell them the wrong thing or I don't know the answers to the questions? And I walked into this crowded hospital room. I mean, like overly crowded, so many family members. And I introduced myself, and there was a 17-year-old in the bed, on, really in a comatose state, and his name was Cedric, and, and his mom was standing right there, and when I walked in, I introduced myself, and she just hugged me, and, I didn't know what to say, right? It was very overwhelming, it was shocking, and I just said, "Just tell me a little bit about Cedric." You know, I just said, "Let's just start at the beginning. Tell me who this young man is." And she began to tell me what an amazing child and son he had been. She goes, he's such a good boy. He's a good son." She said he was amazing at sports. He always showed up. He never was in trouble. He's been such a good son, and he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, which if many of you have dealt with pancreatic cancer, usually it's pretty hard and fast and terminal. It's a terminal diagnosis and it happens. The disease progression is fast. But I mean, he was 17 years old, this kid, and handsome. Shoot, he was handsome, handsome guy. And she said it's like, you know, he's we don't know why, but he's been so good. It doesn't make sense why God is taking him. And I remember sitting down with them and with that whole family around me and walking through the paperwork and talking about hospice, and we were going to move him to our inpatient unit because his condition was pretty acute and symptoms needed to be managed, and it was the best decision to get him out of that hospital setting and somewhere where the family could be comfortable and just spend time with him. And I distinctly remember as we're doing the paperwork and I'm signing it, like, I remember his energy just standing with me. And at that point in time, spirits and ghosts and like they had been silent for a while, or I had shut them out. And like he had given me words to share things with her. And I didn't share them with her from, oh, I'm a medium, I can share gifts. I was nowhere near any of that ability or cognition or awareness. But I remember he was not in his body. I remember seeing him and who he was, and then having his spirit there, which was powerful. And I could feel it in the room. And he gave me the language and the words to comfort them and give them the information they needed to make that transition as smooth as possible, as smooth as it could be under those horrible circumstances. And I remember leaving that day and, as I got in the elevator and then went to my car, I just sobbed, and I sobbed, and it was like these tears of what sadness, grief, and loss feels like, and also what the infinite feels like, that I could feel his spirit, and he kept saying, "There's a story through this. They don't know what they don't know yet. I'm not supposed to be here anymore. Yes, this is painful and this is horrible, but it's for them. There's a reason for this. They have lessons to learn." And it was like a knowing. It wasn't like I had a notebook of information he was giving me, but it was a knowing. And then after that, I mean, I worked in hospice for, God, a lot of years and worked with a lot of death and dying on, getting to walk alongside it in multiple journeys and see it and be at the bedside with patients dying or with families and in differing circumstances. And, towards the end, when my gifts were coming through more clearly, messages would come through and I would begin to deliver them. And that's when it became confusing for me as to my role professionally and in healthcare and what I did, and also my role from an avocation standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint. But me being in hospice gave me the opportunity to recognize that I had not grieved. And at my father's death at 19, and I think a lot of us can relate to repressed or suppressed grief. And the reason I am highlighting these experiences now and death, it's twofold. One, the volume right now in the energy field is very turned up. It's loud. It's like multiple radio stations are playing at one time. The energy is feeling very transitional. So there's a sensitivity and a vulnerability and an exposure energetically where we can be interpreting that in a multitude of ways: fear, pain, suffering, wanting to give up, moments of breakthrough, ecstasy, joy, as I mentioned earlier. That is happening, but it also feels like a big death. There is literal death happening, and in fact, I was on the phone with someone this morning who is making the compassionate decision, most likely to have a pet cross over, and having those conversations and seeing the energy and the energy, then messages that come through from spirits. The human me doesn't sometimes like to deliver what comes through, but I can also feel it, and I know that through the death experience, there's enlightenment. There is incredible expansion, and having lost my mom 2 years ago in a very different way than I lost my father, it was kind of like more of a long game, and us talking about death and grieving while she was still alive. But in the days leading up to her death, in and around her death, there was a portal of energy that was opened. And I moved my office down to my mom's room a while ago. I think some of you probably remember that because the energy in this room, there's like a portal or a vortex, and I can feel it. And that's one of the things I know from my experience around death is where death occurs, there's an imprint, there's a portal. And whether it is acute, traumatic, painful, destructive death, we all know what it's like to walk along the grounds of old battlefields, burial grounds, graveyards, even different areas where death is prevalent or has been prevalent at some point in time. But if you have intimately experienced death with someone, been by their side as they have crossed over, even if it is a pet, because that's pretty powerful too. I've had enough of that. I just celebrated, sadly and beautifully, a year of my dog Tex, his crossing over, which, a year. I miss him tremendously, but it was beautiful. It was painful and beautiful, and my mom's death was the same. It was painful and beautiful, and there's something that happens when we walk between those worlds where we are so viscerally feeling suffering, pain, loss that it is just organic. It's primitive, and at the same time, we are brushed up against the divine, the otherworldly. Right now, the energy feels like the death portal. There's regeneration happening, and yet at the same time, something profound is shifting and dying. Our consciousness is shifting into new levels. And oftentimes, as we shift into another level of reality, a new level of awareness, growth, evolution, personal development, you can look at it from a multitude of angles. A lot of times we revisit where we were, we revisit pain and trauma. And I've said this before, and a good reference for this is my my podcast on 5D consciousness and shifting into 5D consciousness, because it defines different levels of consciousness and gives you some tools and resources. The podcast, and there's a blog that goes along with it. But it feels like right now we are in 5D and keep shifting back into 3D. And that 3D shift, it's like we're revisiting lower frequencies, old stories, old pain, really deeply buried, whether it is on our conscious past in this lifetime or lifetimes or in our cellular memory and DNA. It feels like all of it, by the way. Lots of old stuff in my life has been coming back up in my conscious awareness and through precognitive energies where I'm puzzle piecing into the past. There's a lot of past life energy and symbolism and visions coming through for me. And then there is ancient past in humanity coming through. And it's like it's all flooding in, and it feels like there is wreckage and pain being closed and consolidated in order for something new to be born, yet there's something happening simultaneously. And I hope as I'm sharing this, I don't sound too esoteric and I'm losing you because I've shared with all of you what's happening right now. It's like the language hasn't quite formed yet to explain what we're going through. We're in the middle of a vast paradigm shift. So, whatever you're experiencing now, I encourage you, I'm laughing at what I'm about to say. I encourage you to think about death. Um, and if you are literally right now walking through a death experience of someone you love, or you're taking care of someone who is terminally ill, you've recently experienced a death, or not even recently, and it's coming up, sit with all of your feelings and not just your feelings of pain, suffering, and sorrow, but where do you see the divine through whatever you're walking through? And if literal death isn't showing up for you right now, and hopefully it's not showing up for a lot of us, but if literal death isn't showing up, what within you is being buried, is dying, it has no business coming with you into the future. What in you is fundamentally changing in order to regenerate something new? And can you sit in the discomfort? And I don't mean consternate or get stuck in the discomfort, but when the waves of suffering, pain, disillusionment, disorientation flood through your body, embrace them, breathe into them, and honor that flushing of energy that literally is changing you, because that energy right there, the energy that we're in, is very fertile. And that's what I found in, let's call it the death portal, the literal death portal, is it is so fertile because it's like walking between the worlds, the most visceral, suffering, primal experience alongside of the infinite. It's the quantum field. And I feel like right now, for me especially, and I have a lot of people have recounted this to me, it's like we're in the quantum field. We're writing new timelines, new stories, and making space to process the pain and the fear and the suffering and acknowledge it, but seeding it with more love, more hope, more faith, pure positive potential. And this morning, quite literally, early this morning, I got in the car after my Pilates class, and I was just feeling this flood of discomfort and disorientation, and I noticed it. So I just sat down before driving out of my parking space, and I sat in the car, and I just said, "Bring it on." Bring it on. And I inhaled and exhaled for a handful of breaths. And as I started to do that, it was like the sides of my mouth turned up. After 2 or 3 breath cycles, the anxiety and the flush of disorientation and kind of panic flushed through, and a smile, like energetically, it turned into a smile. I mean, literally it did, and energetically it did. And it was like, okay, one wave down, 3,000 to go. Like, but I just kind of laughed because we have the ability to alchemize and transmute this energy now. How are you doing that? And I'm going to ask a question as I wrap up here, because I think there's two camps, and maybe the answer can be yes to both or no to both. I think, anything goes. Do you fear death or do you fear living forever? And of course, I'm in the camp of, if there's a fear, I don't fear death. I'm like, if that is the case, I know it is a transition from one space to another. And that is not something I've ever feared or fundamentally feared. But what do I fear? Infinity, living forever. If there is a fear, do you fear dying and it all being over, or do you fear living forever? And the fear of mine would be like infinity, because it's so vast. And that's my question for you. Is it that you're afraid of death, or is it that you're afraid of forever? And that's kind of a question, like, from the soul, my soul lately, that's been coming through. What is it that I'm afraid of? And it's being able to blot out fear, face my fears head on. And I think with Neptune and Aries, it's been quite curious. The energy is different. It's very different. The signature is different. The rules of engagement are beginning to change. And I'll talk more about that later, and some practical tools and insights around this. But I will tell you that with Neptune and Aries, it's not about being fearless. It's about facing your fears square in the eye, head on, head to head, looking at those fears, claiming them, naming them, in order to transmute. And that's this regeneration process we're in. I encourage everyone to sit down and journal in the next anytime you want, but in the next handful of days, sit down and journal around death and what comes up for you, whether it's memories and experiences around death, what you're walking through now, or phases in your life where parts and aspects of you have died in order for other parts of you to be born, or if that regeneration is happening for you now. Because the more that you clarify what is no longer serving you, what is changing fundamentally within you, in order to make space for what is coming through, the more centered you will be and feel. Someone reminded me this weekend about centering prayer. We were talking about God and the divine, and we had all these insane synchronicities, just some peripheral friends that we connected with. And I really enjoyed myself. And this woman, we were just talking about our spiritual lives, and she said, yeah, we do centering prayer at our church. And I've participated in centering prayer before, but really meditation and connecting with the divine and with yourself, finding ways to center within yourself right now, whether it be through nature and grounding, journaling, meditation, your therapy, your community support, your exercise. Make your life a centering prayer right now, because the energy is enriching and it has tremendous value for the years ahead, especially with the turbulence we're experiencing on a multitude of levels with the earth, with economics right now, and geopolitics. The dissension is polarizing. And this year, 2025, I truly believe is going to become more volatile and drastic. And for me, it's keeping my own center, my own point of attraction, so I am safe and divinely directed no matter where I am. And I hope that and believe that for all of you. So, whatever practices right now that you are finding clarity and solace in, keep practicing those. But think about what is dying within you, or literally around you, if that is the case. And I have a lot of tenderness and prayers coming out to, if you are walking through death right now, because it's just not easy at any time. But what I do know about death in my experience, and for many people I've shared with, is through it, there's transcendence. There's something other, there's something greater that can come through it. And we're in it right now. So, in order for something greater, be in the now, be in all of it, make all of it meaningful, and trust this regeneration, even when it feels unstable and unsteady and hard to find your way. Trust, come back to your center. Okay, everybody, here's to here's to death. Here's to a beautiful week ahead for everyone. And give me some feedback. Let me know what's going on in your life and any insights or things that are happening for you. I know a lot of people have a lot of rich dreams happening right now. I've been experiencing that. And there's a lot of immediacy in my dreams, a lot of volatility that I'm seeing, and other people are as well. There's a lot of prevalence in that. So let me know how messages, signs, synchronicities, downloads are coming through for you because, like I said, the volume is turned up and being able to synthesize, interpret, and utilize that in a healthy way can be quite confusing. So reach out, let me know, and we'll share some of the feedback and insight that might seem relevant to everyone. Be well, everybody.